Good morning, my name is Will. Welcome to a new video on Trouble Television. Today I actually want to try something a little different format. I want to try to do a video about a little bit of basic knowledge, as I would call it. Um, and today we are going to talk about web development. All right, so to my credentials, I've been in the industry now for a little over 12 years, I guess. I'm a backend engineer by trade, but I've also done a lot of front-end work, so I usually had like a full stack position. In recent times, though, I've gone more into the DevOps like department kind of thing, where I'm working now as a site reliability engineer. Okay, so when we talk about web development, we usually talk about two sides of it, all right? So we first talk about the backend, which is everything server related, and then we talk about the front end on the other side, which is usually everything that is client related. Um, That's why we also refer to backend as server side and frontend as client side. Okay, so maybe first let's look into the backend a little bit more to understand what it actually is about. So the backend usually, like the topics the backend can handle, can range from a little to basically everything related to like a web page or a web app or whatever. The most basic thing a backend actually does is just serve the front end, um, which usually means since the front end are just files like HTML files, CSS files, JavaScript files, whatever, images, um, it usually is like the most basic thing for a backend to just serve the files so the user can actually see them, use them, um, yeah, traverse them, explore them, whatever. Um, it is though the second like most major part of a backend if it is not only serving files but also like handling requests and stuff like that. That it also holds the whole business logic, which usually entails that it can handle, for example, sign-in requests, track account data for users, does callouts to databases, to third-party services, to practically everything you want to do. You usually would do on the backend. The backend served another purpose because the business logic usually entailed as well that we do something that is called server-side rendering. All right. So this usually means that the backend also serves the front end in a way that it generates like dynamic templates, which is called multi-page applications for that matter, where it actually like use templates, bound the data to it, and then just serve the front end like the templates with like the layout around it, with the data bound to it. This was like something the backend like was doing for a long time. It now comes back actually, which is nice because it makes the web development process quite more rapid and easier for the most part. But there's also like the big thing, like the big wave for a couple of years now, where it is about that the front end actually handles a lot of the logic as well. And then we just need the backend for like data provision. And that is usually done by an API that is basically just serving the data, and the front end actually tells what data to fetch. And then there's only like an authentication, authorization layer in front of the API, which is also handled by like tokens nowadays for the most part. All right, this is actually everything I want to talk about the backend for today. So the front end for the most part just is there to serve as an interface, right? Um, it is, after all, the client application usually served by the browser, but it could be anything nowadays. Like we also have like, for example, for native apps like iOS and Android, we have like the web view kind of thing, where you embed technically like a browser in your app, and then you just have it there basically to basically fill the gaps between the native implemented functionality and the stuff you have maybe on your like original service on the web. Um, so this is like one of the big parts. And the second big part I wouldn't disparage is navigation. The reason I am putting navigation down here is because I believe that for the most part, the front end is the thing you use to explore like the application. So if you have like a good front end, maybe like a good style, but you don't have navigation to get to the features, it doesn't matter if you implemented them on the back end after all. So it is usually like a thing that navigation should be a big part of the whole front end cycle, that you think about what paths should be traversable, which path should be explorable, that you actually can show what is happening where. Um, all right, so the front end itself is a little bit of a different kind, because like backend is usually you have like your server written. It doesn't matter if it is like a scripting server, like for example a PHP, Ruby, whatever, that uses like a proxy beforehand or in front of it. Like for example, PHP uses a lot of PHP SVM in combination with Nginx or Apache. Um, but then you have like the whole different side, like for example, the whole compilation thing where you build like your server, for example, in Java or in Go or in whatever you want, Node, where it is really like a standalone application. This is like trivial though, because backend always is a server in some shape or form. Frontend though can come in many shapes and forms. Like for example, there are a delivery type which is called static. This usually means that frontend is generated beforehand and just served by like a server. This is actually used by a lot of sites that have like high traffic, because it is technically easier to pre-generate like the templates you want to show, add maybe a little bit of functionality or dynamic parts with JavaScript, but in the end, it is just one generated document that is just served, because then you actually save a lot of computing power you would need if you generate it on the fly, basically. And this is mostly done like for e-com sites or even blogging sites or whatever, where like the content, for example, like the product detail page or um, a blog article or whatever, isn't like changed that often. And if it is changed, I mean, it can be regenerated, but after all, it is like just one page that is served over and over and over again. So you don't really have like the use case for like a dynamic part that needs to run through the server. The second thing, as I already mentioned, is like the dynamic way of serving the front end, which usually means that you have like a server-side rendering in some form, where the backend actually, or I mean, it could be any service to be honest, but it is usually done by the backend, um, that generates basically the views based on templates and data and then just serves it. So you just need to make sure that you can navigate through the pages. And the last part, or last type, I would just like stand out is like the web app thing. In recent times, try to separate a little bit from the dynamic pages. The reason for that is that I believe that web apps are a little bit of like both. Like you have a lot of static stuff, but you have a lot of dynamic stuff that is done on the client side though. So it is a little different like from the handling. So web apps usually, for example, only use like an API in the background. They don't use like a server-side rendering, even if this is like quite more common nowadays, and they have like the dynamic components implemented in themselves. So you have a routing on the client side. So you don't really need to think about what the backend delivers for pages or whatever. You have them all right there, and then you just have like an engine on the client side that actually navigates through the views, through the pages. Um, I'm not a big fan of that, because usually building a web app entails like using something like React, for example, Vue.js, whatever, and they are like heavy frameworks, like for the most part. I know they have like also short like little components possibilities, but in the end, it is still a lot of JavaScript for something that the server can always also do. So I'm not really sure like how big the benefit is really there. Aside of that, you get more of a native feeling, like using an application rather than like a web document. Which actually brings us to the last point I want to talk about, the DOM. So the front end, for the most part, is determined by something which is called DOM. It is called like the document object model, because we need to remember that front end, like serving web pages and all stuff like that, is technically just like a document. It's quite relatable to PDF. It is quite relatable to Markdown. It's quite relatable to docx. Where it is about that you have like a document, and the application serving the document can do stuff with it. In our case, it is mostly the browser or the web view or the standalone like implementation of the browser engine or whatever. The DOM is usually defined by HTML. So if you write your website, you usually do this in HTML or a derivative of it, which will compile to HTML. You style it by CSS, or again, you have like a derivative of CSS, which compiles to CSS. And those two actually make a big part of making a website pretty and feel native, because technically everything you want to do regarding layouting and styling should be done with HTML and CSS alone. And there is like the last big part of the DOM is JS, which allows to manipulate the DOM. So for example, web apps use a lot of JavaScript to actually build up the whole application. Like you use like, for example, the routing I mentioned before, or you want to have like a certain interactivity or responsiveness of like for certain elements, like for example, draw, menu, whatever. You would build this with JavaScript. You could also build it with CSS, by the way. Nowadays, it is quite possible to do a lot with CSS. All web apps resolve or revolve around this DOM topic, where you have like an object model that you want to manipulate in some shape or form. You define it basically by HTML. You style it with CSS. You extend it or manipulate it with JavaScript, and then you have like the biggest goal you want to achieve is that your web app doesn't feel like a document, even like that you read through something. It should be interesting, because technically we are writing software here, so it is not like just something you put out there. It should be like interesting to look at. And after all, for the most part, you want to build like a product that is actually like shippable, that actually people want to use. So yeah, you need to put a lot of thought into how you actually build your page and stuff like that. So why is all of this relevant? Well, it is quite interesting that web development is still like a big topic, but it is maybe like quite reasonable to explain. Web app has the best distribution model of everything. Like if you imagine, for example, the biggest like companies nowadays, like for example, um, the whole social media like area uses web apps because it is easy to distribute and ship new changes. Like nowadays, you can even compile stuff from native, from higher level languages to a thing called WASM, which can be used by JavaScript. So you can extend the functionality that the browser gives you as JavaScript API. So it is quite interesting what you can do with the web. And after all, it is like probably the most powerful platform we have nowadays. Um, there's a lot of standardization regarding like requesting protocols and stuff like that, which is also quite nice, because you can rely on a lot of like smarter people to actually build like something that is worthwhile and that it actually serves like a purpose, and maybe even generates like some revenue, so you can build a business with it. So yeah, okay, so that was about it. Let me know if you like this new format in the comments. Maybe even if you have like a topic you want to be like you are interested in. I try my best to yeah, come through and put something out. But yeah, that's it for now. So have a great day.